What would you do if you walked into a room to close the biggest deal of your career, and someone looked at you and asked if you were there to serve the drinks? Amara Whitmore stepped out of the black Lincoln, her heels tapping lightly against the cobblestone driveway leading up to the Davenport estate. Her navy blue tailored suit clung to her frame with precision. Not a wrinkle out of place. She didn't wear flashy jewelry or carry a designer bag. She didn't need to. Her presence was her signature, refined, self-assured, and unapologetically powerful. She paused briefly at the entrance, eyes scanning the grand facade before her. Massive stone pillars rose like ancient guardians, and soft golden light spilled from the arched windows of the estate. Everything about the property whispered old money, legacy, exclusivity. But Amara was not here to be impressed. She was here to close a $500 million partnership deal between her cutting-edge biotech company and the Davenport family's luxury conglomerate. Inside, the air buzzed with muted conversations and the clinking of crystal glasses. Waitstaff glided across the marble floors in choreographed harmony. The chandelier overhead sparkled like a constellation. This was a different world. One ruled by names on buildings, family crests, and generational wealth. And tonight, Amara Whitmore, self-made black CEO, was walking straight into the heart of it. She was met at the door by Victor Malone, the Davenport's longtime attorney. "Ms. Whitmore," he said, extending a hand with a rehearsed smile. "So glad you could join us." Amara returned the handshake with a polite nod. "Thank you for the invitation." Victor gestured toward the grand ballroom. "The family is eager to celebrate the future. This is a big step for all of us." She walked beside him, heels echoing softly in the vaulted hallway, past oil paintings of men with stern faces and women with pearl necklaces. The deeper they went, the more the weight of tradition pressed in. But Amara carried her own kind of legacy, the unshakable resolve of someone who had climbed every rung herself. As they entered the ballroom, a subtle hush fell over the room. Heads turned. Whispers floated like perfume. Amara could feel it, the unspoken tension that often followed her into spaces not built for her. A woman in a champagne-colored gown eyed her sharply, lips tight. A man near the fireplace raised his eyebrows, then turned away, chuckling under his breath. She had experienced this before. The look, the doubt, the assumption that she didn't belong. But Amara didn't flinch. She moved with the calm of someone who had already survived 1,000 rooms like this and would survive 1,000 more. At the center of the room stood Preston Davenport, Sr., patriarch of the Davenport Empire. Beside him, his son, Preston Jr., held court like a prince. Blonde, tanned, and relaxed in a white tuxedo jacket, Jr. swirled his champagne with the air of someone who had never been told no. When he saw Amara, a slow, smug smile curled across his lips. He raised his glass casually and said, just loud enough for everyone to hear, "Did someone let the help in early?" For a moment, time froze. A few stifled gasps, followed by an awkward ripple of laughter. Polite, uneasy, no one corrected him. No one looked shocked, not even his father. Just the gentle clinking of glasses and the distant hum of a string quartet trying to pretend they hadn't heard. Amara stood still, her face unreadable, her breath measured. She could have snapped back. She could have called out the insult for what it was, cruel, racist, condescending. But instead, she let silence do the work. A long, cool silence that made the room feel suddenly colder. With quiet grace, she stepped forward, nodded toward Victor, and spoke just loud enough to carry, "Thank you for the warm welcome. I believe I'll be excusing myself for the evening." Then she turned. She didn't wait for dessert. She didn't wait for anyone to chase her down or offer an apology. She simply walked out, each step deliberate, heels clicking like a gavel striking order into chaos. Outside, the summer air wrapped around her shoulders like a cloak. Her driver opened the door without a word. Once inside the car, Amara leaned back in her seat and stared out at the grand estate, its windows glowing like a theater set. Let them talk. Let them wonder what she would do next. She didn't need their validation, but they would soon learn she did not come this far to be tolerated. She came to be respected, and respect has a price. The limousine rolled away from the Davenport estate in silence. Amara Whitmore didn't say a word. Her driver, sensing her mood, kept his eyes on the road, the engine humming steadily beneath them. Outside, the Connecticut countryside blurred into shadows, but inside the car, Amara was sharp. Wide awake, not angry, calculating. She didn't need to replay what had just happened. It was seared into her memory, the way the room had turned still, then soured, the way no one, not even the patriarch, Preston Davenport Sr., had stepped in. The way they had all let it happen. It wasn't the first time she'd faced something like that, but this time it had been different. This time she had walked away from $500 million. The next morning, the business world buzzed. Rumors moved faster than facts. One publication reported a minor cultural misunderstanding between Amara and the Davenports. Another described it as creative differences, but those who had been in the room knew. And more importantly, Amara knew. Her phone rang all morning. Board members, journalists, investors. One even dared to suggest she look past it for the greater good of the company. Don't let emotion ruin a major opportunity, he said. Amara didn't respond. She didn't need to. Emotion hadn't guided her decision. Principle had. Later that day, an email arrived from Victor Malone, the Davenport's legal counsel. The message was coldly professional. Ms. Whitmore, we regret any discomfort caused during last night's event. Please accept our apologies for any unintended remarks. We look forward to finalizing the agreement as scheduled. No mention of Preston Jr.'s name, no phone call, no ownership, just damage control. Amara stared at the screen, letting the words hang in the air. It was the kind of email written to avoid lawsuits, not to mend relationships. She closed her laptop. Across town, in the boardroom of Whitmore Innovations, her team waited anxiously. They knew something had gone wrong, but no one dared speak it aloud. Not yet. When Amara walked into the room, her presence alone brought silence. She didn't sit. She stood at the head of the table and looked each executive in the eye. I know what you're all thinking, she said calmly. You're wondering if I'm going to let one moment, one insult, derail a $500 million partnership. The room was frozen. No one moved. Amara placed both hands on the table and continued. You know me. I've spent 2 decades building this company. I've sacrificed. I've endured setbacks. I've faced rooms full of people who didn't believe I belonged there, and every time, I proved them wrong. Not by yelling, not by folding, but by holding my ground. She paused. What happened last night wasn't just offensive, it was deliberate, it was allowed. And it was followed by silence. If I sign this deal now, I teach every young girl watching that money is more important than dignity. That silence is the price of admission. She straightened. And that is not the lesson I'm here to teach. A beat. Then one executive, Isaiah Carter, head of operations, spoke up. Are you saying we walk away? Amara looked him square in the eyes. I'm saying we stand up. That night, she didn't sleep. She paced, reviewed contracts, checked timelines, consulted with her legal team. Every move had to be precise, bulletproof, because she knew what would happen next. If she backed out, the Davenports would spin the story. Say she was difficult, say she lacked professionalism, say she wasn't ready for real power. They would try to paint her as the problem. But she had something they didn't: clarity. By dawn, her decision was made. She contacted her public relations director and scheduled a press conference for noon the next day. She called an emergency board meeting and shared her intentions. There was pushback. There was panic. But there was also something else in the room, Respect. Amara wasn't just making a business decision, she was making a statement. By breakfast, word had spread. Reporters began speculating. What had really happened at the Davenport dinner? Why had Amara left so abruptly? Why had she gone silent? But the silence was by design. Let them guess. Let them fill the void. Because when she spoke, the world would listen. Meanwhile, inside the Davenport estate, chaos brewed. Preston Jr. had already begun rewriting history. At brunch, he joked with friends that his comment was misinterpreted, that Amara overreacted, that he was just trying to be funny. Preston Sr. wasn't laughing. He watched the media storm build and knew instinctively they had underestimated her. He called Victor. "Fix this!" he barked. "I won't let one woman blow this whole thing up." But Victor knew better. This wasn't just one woman. This was Amara Whitmore. And Amara was about to do something no one in that room ever expected. Say no. Loudly, publicly, irrevocably. The morning after the scandalous dinner, Amara Whitmore's inbox was flooded. Not with outrage, not with remorse, but with silence, loud, calculated silence. The only official communication came mid-morning. An email from Victor Malone, legal representative of the Davenport family. "Dear Miss Whitmore, on behalf of the Davenport family, we regret any miscommunication or unintended offense that may have occurred during last evening's dinner. We remain committed to our shared vision and look forward to proceeding with the agreement as planned." There it was. No acknowledgement. No name. No Preston Jr. Just cold corporate syntax dressed as civility. It was a memo, not an apology. Amara read it once, then again, before closing her laptop slowly. Her eyes lingered on the screen a moment longer, not with hesitation but with clarity. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a message, and their response made it even louder. They assumed she'd get over it. They assumed that the lure of $500 million would make her forget how it felt to be humiliated. They assumed she'd swallow the insult like so many had done before her. But Amara Whitmore didn't build her company by shrinking to fit other people's comfort. Across the city, in a private conference room inside Whitmore Innovations, her senior staff gathered behind closed doors. Some whispered behind coffee cups. Others typed distractedly, trying to stay focused but failing. Everyone was thinking the same thing. Would she really walk away? At 10:02 a.m., Amara entered. The room quieted instantly. She wore a cream blouse beneath a charcoal blazer, her hair pulled back in a smooth twist. There was no anger in her face. Only resolve. She stood at the head of the table, her presence grounding the room. "I know you've seen the headlines," she began. "And you've likely heard whispers of what happened last night." No one interrupted. "Let me make one thing clear," she continued. "We were not negotiating with just a family. We were negotiating with a legacy, one built on wealth, tradition, and influence, and that legacy revealed its true face last night." She paused, eyes scanning the room. "I received a letter this morning from their attorney." No call, no ownership, just words engineered to minimize, not to make right. She opened her laptop, turned it toward the table. The email glowed faintly. The team read in silence. Victor, the CFO, cleared his throat. "Legally, they did apologize. It's standard protocol." Amara turned to him, her voice even. "Legality is not the measure of respect, and protocol is not the same as principle." Across the table, Isaiah Carter, head of operations, looked up. "What's your move?" Amara closed her laptop. "I'm not looking for a move. I'm looking for a stand." Meanwhile, inside the marble halls of the Davenport estate, panic brewed beneath the surface. Preston Sr. paced the solarium, gripping a tumbler of scotch, even though the sun was barely overhead. "Get her back to the table," he barked at Victor Malone over the phone. Victor tried to remain calm. "We sent the standard apology." She hasn't responded. Because it wasn't an apology, Preston snapped. It was a PR shield. Preston Jr. strolled in mid-call, still smug, still untouchable. She's being dramatic, he said, pouring himself a drink. It was a joke. Preston Sr. glared at his son. That joke might cost us everything. But Junior shrugged. It's not like anyone cares what she thinks. She's not one of us. Silence fell over the room like a guillotine. And in that moment, Preston Sr. realized something chilling his son had said out loud, what the entire room had silently believed the night before. Back at Whitmore Innovations, Amara sat alone in her office, staring out the window at the city she had helped transform. She thought of all the times she had endured the quiet slights, the missed handshakes, the condescending smiles, the sudden assumption that she was in the wrong room. But this wasn't just about her anymore. She was being watched now by her team, her peers, young women still finding their voices, and if she accepted a hollow apology now, it would send a message louder than Preston Jr.'s words ever could. If you're powerful enough, you never have to mean it. No, that wasn't the story she was going to tell. She picked up her phone and called her communications director. I want a press conference, she said. Tomorrow? Noon. I'll write the statement myself. There was a pause on the other end. Are we withdrawing, Amara? Her voice didn't waver. We're doing what they didn't, standing for something. That evening, she sat at her kitchen table, legal files and press notes scattered before her. Her mother had once told her, your silence will never protect you. Back then, Amara hadn't fully understood. Now, she did. The silence in that ballroom had been its own betrayal. Not loud, not violent, but complicit. The silence in that follow-up email had been no different. They had wrapped disrespect in politeness, wrapped racism in protocol, and expected her to say thank you. But tomorrow, she would say something else. She would say, no. The next morning came with rain. A soft, steady drizzle painted the windows of Amara Whitmore's office, streaking the glass with silver threads. The city below moved as it always did, unbothered, hurried, distracted. But inside her office, time felt still, heavy. She stared at her phone, not because she expected it to ring, but because a part of her still believed in decency. Even now, even after everything. But the call never came. Not from Preston Davenport Sr., not from Preston Jr., not from anyone who had been there that night. Instead, her assistant entered quietly with an envelope. Another message from Victor Malone, she said. Amara took it, nodding. Her fingers slid beneath the seal. Inside, a printed letter on thick, cream-colored Davenport stationery. The wording was precise. Formal, legal. Miss Whitmore, we value our ongoing relationship and appreciate your contributions to this promising collaboration. Any comments made at the recent dinner were in no way intended to cause offense. We remain enthusiastic about the partnership and hope to move forward in a mutually respectful spirit. There it was again. Politeness with no substance, courtesy with no courage, language designed to protect reputation, not repair trust. She folded the letter in half and placed it gently back into the envelope. No anger, just confirmation. They didn't see the problem, or worse, they saw it and didn't care. By mid-afternoon, her team gathered in the press room of Whitmore Innovations' downtown headquarters. Rows of empty chairs waited. Microphones stood poised before the podium like sharpened arrows. News crews were already setting up, reporters checking their feeds, eager to be the first to break the story. Behind the curtain, Amara reviewed her notes one last time. She wasn't nervous. She was ready. Her communications director approached. Still no personal outreach? Amara shook her head. Just more crafted apologies? All strategy, no soul. There was a pause. You know, the director added, most CEOs wouldn't walk away from this kind of deal. Amara looked her in the eye. Most CEOs haven't spent their lives being treated like an outsider in rooms they built themselves to enter. Across town, at the Davenport estate, the atmosphere was growing tense. Preston Sr. sat in his study, television muted, watching the news crawl across the bottom of the screen. Whitmore CEO to make public statement at noon. Sources suggest partnership in jeopardy. He poured a drink and took a long, steadying sip. Victor Malone sat across from him. We still have time to salvage this. Preston's eyes narrowed. How? Victor hesitated. A real apology. A direct call from you or your son. Preston Jr., lounging on the leather sofa, scoffed. Apologize? For what? She's overreacting. Victor turned to him, frustration breaking through his usually cool demeanor. Your words, your tone, your timing. All of it was wrong, and you know it. Junior waved a hand. Whatever. She won't blow up a $500 million deal over a comment. Victor's voice dropped. She's not bluffing. Senior set down his glass, a grim look settling into his face. Then we underestimated her, and that's on us. Still, he didn't pick up the phone. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was fear of how it would look. Or maybe it was that deep, dangerous belief, the one passed down in their family like an heirloom, that men like him didn't apologize to women like her. At 11:59 a.m., Amara stepped out onto the stage. The room went silent. She wore a simple cream blazer and black slacks, no logo behind her. No teleprompter, just her, the microphones, and the truth. Good afternoon, she began, her voice calm and steady. I founded Whitmore Innovations with a mission to change lives not just through science, but through example. I've sat in thousands of meetings, closed millions in funding, and overcome barriers that had nothing to do with merit and everything to do with perception. The room held its breath. 2 nights ago, I was invited to the estate of a partner company. I walked into that room with respect, intention, and good faith. What I received in return was silence in the face of an insult. Not from strangers, but from potential allies. Not in private, but in public. And in the days since, I've received crafted messages, filtered statements, and legal reassurances, but no truth, no responsibility. She paused, scanning the cameras. When dignity is denied, no amount of money justifies silence. Reporters began scribbling, murmuring. I'm formally withdrawing from the Davenport partnership, effective immediately. Gasps filled the room. A ripple of shock swept through the crowd, but Amara didn't flinch. This isn't about one person or one deal, she continued. It's about who we choose to become when tested, about whether our values bend in the face of wealth or whether they hold, and mine will hold. She stepped back from the podium. There were no slogans, no applause, just a heavy, earned silence. But in that silence, she was heard. At the Davenport estate, the news broke like a thunderclap. The TV played Amara's speech in full. Preston Jr. paled. Preston Sr. stood frozen. Victor closed his briefcase and quietly walked out of the room. What they had feared was now real. And still, they never picked up the phone. Because by the time they realized the price of their pride, Amara had already moved on. It was a quiet evening in Amara Whitmore's high-rise apartment overlooking the skyline of New York City. The soft hum of traffic below rose and fell like a lullaby. A single lamp glowed in the corner, casting warm light across a room filled with sleek furniture, framed patents, and photographs of Amara with scientists, students, and world leaders. On the dining table lay a manila folder, the final contract for the Davenport partnership. It had been reviewed, signed by every member of the Davenport board, and expedited to her office that afternoon. All it needed was one signature. Hers. $500 million, global distribution, a once-in-a-generation leap forward. All of it just one pen stroke away. Amara sat beside it, hands folded, unmoving. Her phone buzzed again, Another call from the legal team. Another email from the CFO urging reconsideration. Another text from a board member reminding her how many livelihoods this deal would touch. But Amara wasn't a woman moved by volume. She moved by clarity. And tonight, clarity had come. Earlier that day, she had done her homework. She'd reviewed the fine print, the obligations, the exit clauses. She had consulted her legal team not to find a way in, but to confirm her way out. If she pulled out now, she would lose the exclusive rights to Davenport's distribution channels. There would be backlash. Headlines. She might lose investors, she might lose friends, but what she wouldn't lose was herself. At 7:32 p.m., Amara called an emergency board meeting via video. The faces of her executive team appeared one by one, tired but expectant. They knew what this was, and none of them wanted to say what they feared she was about to say. Amara began, her voice measured. I know we've all worked tirelessly on this deal. I want to start by saying thank you for your time, your trust, and your talent. She paused. But I didn't build this company to chase validation, and I didn't fight my way through boardrooms, biases, and closed doors just to sign away what we stand for the moment someone waves money in our face. A silence settled. Then she continued, This week has revealed a truth about our potential partners, and that truth is not aligned with the world we're trying to build. She lifted the manila folder and held it up to the camera. I'm not signing this. The CFO leaned forward. Amara, I respect you. I truly do. But do you realize the risk? Walking away now could cost us, Amara finished. Yes. I've counted the cost. I've also counted the cost of staying silent. Isaiah Carter, her head of operations, spoke next. I saw what happened. I watched that press conference 3 times today, and I just want to say thank you, because no one in my life has ever done that before. Not publicly, not with that much on the line. Others began to nod. And in that moment, Amara saw it. This wasn't just her stand anymore. It was theirs too. She ended the meeting with a quiet promise. We're not going backward. We're going forward with integrity, and we'll find partners who match our values, not just our price point. She clicked, end meeting. Then she stood, walked to the window, and looked out over the city lights. There was no music. No applause, no dramatic soundtrack, just peace. Meanwhile, the Davenport estate was far from peaceful. Preston Sr. sat in his darkened office, the TV off, the curtains drawn. He had tried for 2 days to pretend that nothing had changed, but the silence from Whitmore Innovations had become unbearable. Victor Malone, the family's legal advisor, entered without knocking. She's done. Preston turned. What do you mean? She's out. She just held a board meeting. Internal memo already leaked. She's not signing the deal. Preston Jr. scoffed from the armchair. She's bluffing. No, Victor said flatly. She's leading. Preston Sr. exhaled slowly, then rose to his feet and looked out the window. This will destroy our rollout plans. Victor didn't reply. They both knew the truth. The Davenports needed this deal far more than Amara did, and they had lost it. Not because of a business miscalculation, but because they had failed to see who they were really dealing with. Back in Amara's apartment, she placed the unsigned contract back into the envelope and tucked it away in a drawer. Not out of sight, but out of reach. It would remain there, a quiet reminder of the choice she had made. Her phone buzzed again this time, from a familiar number. It was her mentor, a retired venture capitalist who had once taken a chance on her when no one else would. Amara, the voice said warmly, I watched the press conference. You did what I never had the courage to do. I'm proud of you. Amara smiled, eyes softening. Thank you. I just couldn't stay quiet anymore. No, the voice replied. You spoke louder than anyone else in the room, without ever raising your voice. That night, as rain continued to fall against the glass, Amara finally sat down, not to work, not to fight, but to rest. She had made her decision. She had lost a deal, but she had gained something far more valuable. A legacy. It was barely noon, but the media vans were already lined up in front of the Whitmore Innovations headquarters. Cameramen adjusted tripods. Journalists clutched notepads and tablets. Producers whispered into earpieces. The air was tense, thick with expectation. Rumors had swirled for days. Some said Amara Whitmore was stepping down. Others believed she was about to announce a pivot in corporate direction. But one thing was certain. Everyone knew she was about to say something important. Inside the building, Amara stood behind a glass wall overlooking the stage being prepared below. She wore a soft grey suit, understated, elegant. Her hair was pulled back into a sleek bun. No flashy accessories, no makeup team, just presence. Her communications director approached her with a phone in hand. CNBC wants a post-conference exclusive. They'll go live if you mention them. Amara didn't turn away from the window. This isn't about airtime. It's about truth. The director hesitated, then nodded. One floor down, Isaiah Carter, her head of operations, made final checks on the lighting and sound. "Keep it clean, no frills," he told the tech crew. "She's the message." And she was. At 12:02 p.m., Amara stepped onto the stage. The murmurs stopped. The room stilled. She took a breath, not to calm herself, but to center the weight of what she was about to do. Not just for herself, but for everyone watching, for every woman told to be quiet, for every minority who had to earn a seat and an apology. The lights were hot, the cameras relentless, but her voice was calm. "Good afternoon," she began. "My name is Amara Whitmore. I am the founder and CEO of Whitmore Innovations." Her tone wasn't defensive. It wasn't rehearsed. It was deliberate. 2 weeks ago, our company entered into final stage negotiations with the Davenport Group regarding a long-term, high-value partnership. The words dropped into the silence like stones. At a dinner to commemorate this potential partnership, I was publicly disrespected. Not through accident, not through misunderstanding, but through words spoken clearly, and a room that responded with silence. Some in the audience shifted uncomfortably. Others leaned in. What followed was not an apology, but a strategy. Not accountability, but avoidance. And that, she said, voice rising only slightly, is not the kind of leadership I align with. She took a slow breath. And so, today, I am formally announcing that Whitmore Innovations is terminating all pending negotiations with the Davenport Group. Effective immediately. The room erupted. Cameras clicked. Reporters scrambled. Headlines were being written in real time. Whitmore walks away from £500 deal. CEO rejects power over principle. But Amara wasn't finished. This decision wasn't made lightly. I understand what it means financially. I understand the backlash it may bring, but I also understand something more important. She looked directly at the front row, where a group of young interns sat wide-eyed. I understand the cost of staying silent. A hush fell again. When leaders fail to speak up, they give permission. And I will not give permission to a culture that thrives on exclusion, disguised as tradition. From Wall Street to Silicon Valley, her words were broadcast live. In corporate lounges and open office kitchens, employees paused their work to watch. In dorm rooms, on subway rides, in coffee shops, people listened. Not just because of what she said, but how she said it. With clarity, with grace, with power that didn't need to raise its voice. By 12:17 p.m., the press conference had gone viral. Clips flooded social media. A video of Amara saying, "When leaders stay silent, they give permission," was reposted by celebrities, scholars, and CEOs. The hashtag #respect is priceless trended in over 20 countries. Employees at Whitmore Innovations cheered quietly in their offices. Some cried, some hugged. Some just sat in silence, stunned by what they'd witnessed. But everyone understood one thing. This wasn't just a business decision. It was a cultural earthquake. Inside the Davenport estate, the fallout was instant. Preston Sr. watched the press conference with blood draining from his face. His fingers clenched the armrest as Amara's words played on screen, unapologetic and precise. Preston Jr. threw his phone down. She actually did it. Victor Malone, the family's legal advisor, stood in the corner, shaking his head. She didn't just walk away. She took the high road and turned it into a runway. Senior turned off the television, but the silence in the room was louder than anything on screen. "She'll regret this," he muttered, but even he didn't believe it. Back in her office, Amara sat alone for a moment, eyes closed. The press conference was over, but the ripple had only just begun. There were dozens of messages, waiting calls from partners, allies, journalists. But she let them sit. Because she knew something most people didn't. There is a rare kind of strength in restraint, in not chasing the last word, in letting truth echo on its own. Her silence now was not surrender, it was punctuation. A full stop to a chapter that needed ending, and the start of one no one would forget. It started as a whisper, a quiet email, an anonymous tip. Then, just hours after Amara Whitmore's press conference ended, a video appeared online, posted to a small Twitter account with barely 200 followers. No name, no tags, just a simple caption. She wasn't exaggerating. In the grainy footage, a wide shot of the Davenport Estate ballroom came into view. The angle was slightly tilted-like. It had been filmed from waist height, hidden behind a serving tray. The image shook briefly as someone shifted, and then the sound came in clearly. Preston Davenport Jr. raising his glass, smirking, saying the words with perfect clarity. Did someone let the help in early? A beat of silence. Then forced laughter, the clinking of glasses. The camera caught Amara's face, still, dignified, unreadable. And then the video cut, 18 seconds long, but it hit like a detonation. Within minutes, it was reposted by larger accounts. Within an hour, it was on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. By midnight, it had gone viral with over 4.2 million views and climbing. News anchors replayed it in split screen beside Amara's press conference. TikTok creators stitched the clip into videos titled, "This is what corporate racism looks like." Activists used it to highlight the cost of silence in elite spaces. Business leaders weighed in, some defending Amara, others cautiously regretting the optics. But the public was done being polite. Hashtags exploded across platforms. Respect is priceless. We stand with Amara. Not just a comment. Old money, old mindsets. The story had shifted. What had once been framed by some media outlets as a misunderstanding or a business divergence was now undeniable. The insult, the smirks, the cowardly silence. It wasn't a story anymore. It was a reckoning. At the Whitmore offices, Amara's team watched the storm unfold in real time. Isaiah Carter burst into the communications room holding his phone. "It's real. Someone filmed it." "It's out there." Amara's communications director played the video silently on loop. "That angle. It must have been one of the servers." Another voice added, "Or someone brave enough to know the truth wouldn't be believed without proof." Amara stood in the doorway, calm as ever. "They believed me without the footage," she said softly. "This just proves it to the ones who needed permission." Her director looked at her. "What do we do now?" Amara didn't hesitate. "Nothing. Let the world speak." Across town, the Davenport estate was unraveling. Preston Jr. was trending for all the wrong reasons. Memes, parodies, editorials. Even late-night comedians joined in. one calling him the human version of a country club dress code. Brands tied to the Davenport conglomerate saw immediate backlash. Boycotts were launched, taglines were twisted into punchlines, influencers began dropping their brand collaborations. Public relations teams scrambled to draft statements, but it was too late. The court of public opinion had already ruled. Inside the estate's marble halls, Preston Sr. watched the chaos unfold with hollow eyes. His empire, built over decades, was now bleeding credibility by the second. He was recorded, he muttered. They caught the exact moment. Victor Malone, standing in the corner with a phone to his ear, nodded grimly. Every platform has it, and now investors are calling. They want distance. And what about Whitmore? She's silent. Powerful kind of silence. Preston Sr. rubbed his temples. All this over a joke. Victor looked at him sharply. It was never a joke. That's why it stuck. The real shock came the next morning when Harvard Business Review published an op-ed titled, "When Silence is Complicity: What CEOs Can Learn from Amara Whitmore." It was shared over 40,000 times in less than 24 hours. Another article followed in Forbes, "Walking Away from $500 million, The Power of Saying No." What had once been seen as a risk now looked like vision. Amara's decision wasn't reckless, it was revolutionary. Inside her apartment, Amara sat quietly on the balcony, the city humming beneath her. She sipped tea, letting the morning sun warm her skin. The noise around her, the media, the speculation, the shifting tides, none of it touched her peace. Her phone buzzed again, another alert. Another offer from a company eager to partner. But she wasn't rushing into new deals. She was listening, watching, and waiting for the right ones, the ones whose values matched her own. That afternoon, an email arrived from a private address. "My name is Elijah Westwood. I run Langston Capital. We'd be honored to discuss a future with your company built not on politics but on principle. Your leadership has changed how we define power." It was one of 12 offers that came that day alone. And for the first time in years, Amara felt something she hadn't felt in business in a very long time. Hope. Not just for herself, but for everyone watching. It started with whispers from the stock market floor. By mid-morning, it was a headline. Davenport Industries shares plummet amid backlash. At first, it was just a dip 2%, maybe 3%, but by noon it had dropped 18%, wiping out hundreds of millions in market value. The phones at the Davenport corporate office rang non-stop. Investors demanded answers. Board members demanded resignations. And employees, once proud to work for a family name that commanded respect, began scrubbing their LinkedIn profiles. Inside the Manhattan headquarters of Davenport Industries, tension buzzed like static. Glass doors shut tighter. Voices lowered. Every conversation began with the same question. Did you see the video? The video was everywhere, not just on social media, but on financial news, morning talk shows, and even primetime TV. Preston Davenport Jr.'s smirk, his words, the uncomfortable laughter, and above it all, the complete lack of accountability from anyone who had been in that room. What made it worse wasn't just what was said. It was the silence that followed. And the world had finally decided that silence spoke volumes. Back at the Davenport estate, the empire was crumbling from within. Preston Sr. stood in the great hall, staring up at a portrait of his grandfather, a man who had once shaken hands with presidents. Now, the name Davenport was trending worldwide for all the wrong reasons. Victor Malone entered the room, face tight with urgency. "We've lost 3 brand partners in the last 12 hours. Luxwear pulled out of their joint campaign. Evernay cancelled the winter product line. Even the Midtown Hotel Group wants out." Preston Sr. exhaled sharply. "We've weathered scandals before." Victor shook his head. "Not like this. This isn't a scandal. This is a value shift. And we're on the wrong side of it." The board called an emergency meeting that evening. Every seat was filled. Screens displayed headlines from around the globe. One slide simply read, "Preston Jr. is a liability." For once, Jr. wasn't present. He had been suspended from the board earlier that morning, his access revoked, his office emptied. The board chairwoman, a steely executive named Joanna Lang, spoke first. "Our credibility is gone," she said plainly. "This isn't about public relations anymore. It's about corporate survival." She clicked to the next slide, a heat map showing online sentiment. The entire boardroom lit up in angry red. "If we don't distance ourselves from the legacy that enabled this moment, we won't survive the quarter." Preston Sr. sat silently at the end of the table. For the first time in his long career, he had nothing to say, because he knew they were right. The next day, a press release was issued. Davenport Industries deeply regrets recent events and the words of Mr. Preston Davenport Jr., who's been placed on indefinite leave. The company is reviewing its internal policies and remains committed to rebuilding trust. But it was too late. The world had already moved on to Amara Whitmore. Amara didn't gloat. She didn't speak publicly about the video. She didn't retweet the memes or comment on the fall of the family that tried to humiliate her. She simply kept moving forward. And that silence, her silence, was louder than any press statement. Inside her company, morale was at an all-time high. Employees felt empowered. Applicants flooded the HR inbox. Schools and non-profits reached out, asking for speaking engagements and mentorship programs. CEOs began referencing her press conference in internal leadership memos. One tweet summed it up best. Amara didn't just walk out of that ballroom, she walked into history. Meanwhile, the Davenports retreated behind iron gates. Preston Jr. disappeared from public view entirely. Paparazzi spotted him once in the Hamptons, hunched behind tinted car windows, shielding his face. Preston Sr. issued a televised apology, stiff and rehearsed. "I deeply regret the pain caused by my son's words. We acknowledge the failure in our response and are committed to meaningful change." But viewers weren't convinced. Comment sections flooded with disbelief. "Too little, too late. Why didn't you speak when it mattered? You're sorry now that your stock is down." The apology landed flat. Because the truth was, people don't want regret. They want responsibility. And the Davenports had failed that test. In boardrooms across America, executives took notice. Diversity and inclusion teams were summoned for urgent meetings. HR departments reviewed their grievance procedures. PR firms rewrote brand manuals, not because they feared becoming the next Davenport, but because Amara's stand had made something crystal clear. The old way of doing business, closed rooms, unchecked egos, polite racism, was no longer sustainable. The rules had changed, and she had rewritten them with one word: no. That weekend, at a charity gala in Boston, Amara walked the red carpet not as a cautionary tale, but as a symbol. Flashes lit up around her. Cameras rolled. One reporter leaned in with a mic. "Ms. Whitmore, what do you say to critics who think you sacrificed too much?" Amara smiled softly. "Dignity," she said, "is never too much." The morning after Preston Davenport Sr.'s apology aired, a quiet buzz filled the offices of Whitmore Innovations. Not tension, not caution, momentum. Emails flooded in partnership proposals, speaker invitations, investment offers, letters from universities, non-profits, even high school debate teams. They weren't just congratulating Amara Whitmore for her courage. They were reaching out because they saw something deeper. A leader who didn't flinch. A company that didn't bend. A vision that didn't compromise. By 8 a.m., the company's receptionist had already tallied 92 inbound calls, triple the daily average. By noon, the PR team had received 17 interview requests and a dozen requests for licensing talks from firms in Singapore, Paris, and Toronto. And then came the phone call. Amara had just returned from a leadership roundtable when her assistant entered her office with wide eyes. It's Elijah Westwood. He's on the line. Amara paused. Elijah Westwood, founder of Langston Capital, one of the most respected names in global finance, notorious for turning down 9 out of 10 deals, known for having ethics that matched his empire. She picked up the phone. Elijah, she said, calm but curious. Amara, his voice answered, smooth and direct. I watched your press conference live. Then I watched it again with my board. Then I showed it to my teenage daughter. Amara smiled gently, saying nothing. I'd like to propose something, Elijah continued. A strategic partnership. Long-term, global, and values-aligned. No dinner speeches, no glass ceilings. There was a pause on the line. And no sons, he added with a half-laugh. Amara chuckled softly. Let's schedule a conversation. I don't do rushed commitments. That's why I called you, Elijah said. I know you don't. By week's end, Whitmore Innovations had received 32 formal partnership offers, including from Chase Langston, Capital Citrine Biomedical Vireo Technologies, and 2 former competitors who now sought collaboration. But what stunned analysts more than the volume was the tone. Every letter acknowledged Amara's values. Every offer emphasized integrity, inclusion, and shared vision. This wasn't just a business expansion, it was a redefinition of what success could look like. Internally, the company was transforming. Amara called a full-staff town hall, the first of its kind since the founding of the company. Hundreds of employees gathered in person and online. Engineers, designers, lab technicians, administrators, everyone tuned in. Amara stepped up to the center of the floor. No microphone, no stage. I want to thank each of you, she began. Not for enduring the last few weeks, but for believing in something bigger than the deal we walked away from. She looked around the room. This company was never meant to be just another tech firm. We are a place where talent thrives with dignity, where innovation doesn't come at the cost of silence, and where our product is not just what we make, it's how we lead. The room was quiet, reverent. And now, she said, we grow, on our terms. Recruitment soared, applications to intern or work at Whitmore Innovations increased by 600%. Business schools cited Amara in case studies titled Ethical Leadership in the Modern Era. Entire panels at leadership conferences rebranded to include themes like courage over conformity and when to walk away. More than that, Amara had shifted the cultural bar. Her actions had become a reference point. In job interviews, young professionals cited her name. In team meetings, HR departments asked, what would Amara do? And most remarkably, in boardrooms across the country, executives began listening differently. Less to titles, more to substance. 1 week later, Forbes released its annual Women to Watch list. Amara wasn't just on the cover. She was the entire cover story. The headline? She said no, and built an empire. Inside, the article read, while others bowed for access, she stood for values. While others feared the fallout, she embraced the future. In walking away from a $500 million deal, Amara Whitmore redefined the metrics of power and made herself unstoppable. But for Amara, the real victory wasn't in headlines. It was in the handwritten letter that arrived on her desk 2 days later. It was from a girl named Layla, age 14, from South Carolina. Dear Ms. Whitmore, I saw your video in school. Before, I thought girls like me had to stay quiet to get ahead. Now I know I can speak up. I want to be a CEO like you. I want to build something. And I want to say thank you for making me feel possible. Amara held the letter for a long time. Longer than any press release. Longer than any contract. Because this was the kind of return on investment she cared about most. Whitmore Innovations was no longer just a company. It was a movement, and the world was finally catching up. 6 weeks after the press conference, Amara Whitmore stepped onto the stage of the Global Leadership Summit in Geneva, Switzerland. The room held more than 2,000 attendees. Heads of state, tech founders, economists, students. A massive LED screen behind her displayed one phrase: the cost of dignity. She didn't need to clear her throat or adjust the mic. The room fell silent the moment she walked out. No dramatic music. No applause, just presence. She began with a story. I was 29 when I walked into a room full of people who had already decided I didn't belong there. I didn't have the right shoes. I didn't go to the right schools. I wasn't the right shade or shape, but I had an idea that could save lives, and I spoke anyway. Her voice was calm, slow, deliberate. Since then, I've sat through 1,000 meetings where silence cost more than words ever could. Until one night, when the silence wasn't mine, it belonged to everyone else. The audience knew the moment. The video had been played on every network, dissected in every classroom. But now, hearing it from her in person, it hit differently. She continued, "When I walked away from a $500 million deal, people said I was reckless, that I'd regret it, that I'd blown up my future." She paused, but what they didn't see was what I'd gained. She looked across the rows of leaders and decision-makers. I gained clarity. I gained partners who understood that a company without a soul is just a brand with a budget. And I gained the trust of people who have been watching for far too long what happens when dignity is traded for power. After her talk, the applause was thunderous. People stood. Some wiped away tears, others just nodded in silent agreement. It wasn't just what Amara said, it was that she had lived it. Later that evening, as she stood by the balcony overlooking Lake Geneva, she received a quiet tap on the shoulder. A young woman in her early 20s, clearly nervous, stood holding a folder. "Miss Whitmore," she said, voice trembling, "I'm interning with the World Health Foundation. I wanted to say thank you. When I saw what you did, I quit a toxic job. I started applying to companies that actually care. I'm here because I followed your story." Amara smiled. "Then I'm glad I told it." Back in the US, Whitmore Innovations continued to thrive. Not just in revenue or market growth, but in reputation. It had become the gold standard for ethical leadership. Its onboarding packet now included a code of dignity, not just conduct. Its hiring process prioritized lived experience, not just resumes. And for every product launched, there was a community outreach partner involved. They were no longer just innovating tech. They were innovating culture. Meanwhile, the Davenport name faded into the background. Their apology tour had long ended. Their son, Preston Jr., had been removed from every major board, and their family brand had lost nearly 30% of its market share. But Amara never mentioned them again. Not in interviews, not in keynotes, not even in private meetings. Because her story wasn't about their fall, it was about her rise. One morning, she received a small brown envelope. No return address. Inside, a note written in block letters. "Your silence after all this. It speaks louder than our PR ever could. I hope my daughter grows up with a boss like you, not a father like me. PD." Amara read it once, then gently folded the note and slid it into her desk drawer, right beside the unsigned Davenport contract she had never thrown away. A reminder of the deal that didn't define her, of the word that did, no. Months later, a professor at Columbia Business School gave a final lecture to his MBA class. On the whiteboard, he wrote one question: "What is the most valuable word in business?" The students gave answers: equity, strategy, trust, innovation. He smiled. "All good guesses," he said. "But here's what Amara Whitmore taught us this year." He turned back to the board. He wrote, "No." And somewhere across the country, a young black girl sat in a classroom watching Amara's speech on a projector screen. She clutched her notebook, inspired. In the margins, she scribbled 3 words in big, bold letters. "Say it proud. Because thanks to Amara, she finally believed she could. In a world that often rewards silence over truth, Amara Whitmore's story reminds us that dignity is never too expensive to defend. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't retaliate. She simply walked away from power, from prestige, from a $500 million deal because the cost was her integrity. That kind of courage isn't loud. It doesn't demand attention. But it changes everything. For those of us who have lived through decades of compromise, of being told to keep the peace, her choice is a quiet revolution. It teaches us that you're never too successful, too seasoned, or too late in life to say, "No, this is not who I am." The respect you fight for at 30 can shape the world for someone at 13. Her silence wasn't weakness. It was a statement that leadership without values is just ego in a suit. And perhaps that's the legacy we should all strive for. Not the deals we closed or the titles we held, but the moments we stood still and chose character over convenience. Because sometimes the most powerful word you'll ever say is the one you refuse to take back. No.